Hi, today I am doing the new Windows and Mirrors tag. This is a tag that was originally and recently created by Book Chat with Pat, a channel I've only been watching for the past 2-3 months or so, but I have been enjoying her very much. This tag consists of questions about books and about BookTube and how those things can help us see ourselves in books, but also how we can learn more about other perspectives, which I think is really important, and I think that's one of the best things about reading. We can really get someone else's perspective. If we're watching something, that can be a great way to learn as well. But I think with a book, we're really in a character's mind and we feel what they feel and we see things exactly how they see them. And so it can be a great way to learn about different perspectives that we're not very familiar with, such as people of a different background, different race, different whatever. There are so many things. And that's one of the many reasons why I love to read. I think I'm a very understanding person, and I think one of the reasons why is because I read a lot. So I've gotten multiple perspectives from different kinds of people who I can't relate to, and some I can relate to. And with the ones you can relate to, that's good as well, because maybe if you're experiencing something and you're having trouble putting into words, an author has done that for you, and then you can send that part of a book or read it out loud to someone to help them understand something that you experience. And I have done that before. Books can definitely help us realize that we're not alone. So let's get into the questions. The first question is, talk about a few books that served as mirrors to you, allowing you to see some aspect of your life experience reflected in a meaningful way. So I put down a few books for this one. The first book that came to mind is the middle grade novel A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. I read this book earlier this year and I thought it was really good. This book is about a young preteen girl who lives in Scotland, and she is autistic, and she learns about the witch trials that used to happen years ago, and she is very upset by them because she feels that women who were tried as witches were treated unfairly, especially as she is different from her peers. She feels that maybe the witches were just like her, and so she's really interested in her town acknowledging what happened and having them build a memorial for the women who were falsely accused. I thought it was a great book. I liked the autism representation in it, and I thought that it did a great job explaining how some things feel, and it also challenged and dismantled some incorrect stereotypes about autistic people, such as that they don't feel empathy. Since I, like the main character in that book, Addie, am also autistic, I could definitely relate to a lot of what was in there. And I think that book could be very important for helping other people learn about autism if they do not personally experience it. And when I was reading it, I felt a bit surprised that I haven't read many books with autistic characters. I would have thought that I'd read more, but I have not. But I definitely want to. There are definitely more on my TBR that I plan on getting to, and if you have any recommendations for that, I'd love to hear. I think we'll definitely see more in the future as there is more awareness, but yeah, surprisingly, I haven't read very many, so it was really nice to read that. There are many times when I can relate to something in a book, but to relate to something like that so strongly was a nice feeling. So it was definitely one of the books that came to mind for this question. It was definitely one of the books where I saw myself represented the most. I definitely understood how the main character felt in a lot of situations, and I basically felt like I was feeling what she was feeling too, and I felt that I really understood her. The second book I chose for this question is Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I read this book when I was in 9th grade, so that was 6 years ago at this point. I was really getting back into reading, so I read a few books by John Green back then, especially as I was getting into reading young adult books now that I was kind of that age. And I'd heard that this book was about anxiety, that it had a big focus on that. I honestly don't remember much about this book. I definitely remember some things that happened, but when it comes to the main plot, I believe there was like a mystery or something going on, but that's not really what I remember from it. But it is a contemporary young adult novel, and I had heard that it was very much about anxiety. When I went into reading it, I was a bit skeptical because I was like, okay, that's something that everyone experiences differently, so I may not relate to it. It may not be the kind of anxiety that I experience, but that's okay. So I went into it with that understanding. However, when I read it, I felt that I could really relate to it and that it really put a lot of the complicated feelings I had into words. Since then, I've had a better understanding of the things I struggle with, but this book really helped. And as I said, there have been times where I've taken something from a book and sent it to someone to help them understand how my mind works or a struggle I may have. And this is definitely one of those books. I could relate heavily to the main character. I believe her name is Aza. I mean, I know it's A-Z-A, but I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced. But I could relate very much to the specific struggle she had with anxiety and OCD. that kind of struggle can be very hard to understand and especially difficult to explain. So I think it's really nice when a book is able to put those mental health struggles into words. Then we can share those words with other people. But also while I was reading it, I could just really relate. I was like, here's someone who can put what I'm feeling into words, because when I try to do it, it may sound a bit complicated or messy and people may not really understand, but when you've got a professional author doing it, it might come out sounding a bit more coherent. So I'm really thankful for this book. I felt really seen in it. So I ended up being able to relate to this book heavily, and I think that this book is very important for mental health awareness. The third and final book I am answering this question with is the graphic novel Speechless by Erin Nell Steinke. This is another book I read earlier this year. This is middle grade contemporary about a young girl named Mira who struggles with selective mutism. In her case, it can be different for everyone who experiences it. She struggles with speaking at school, but can communicate just fine at home. Selective mutism is another thing I struggle with, and that can also be very complicated for others to understand. So I think it's important that books like these exist. Also, Mira has a YouTube channel that she works on at home, so I can relate to that aspect as well. It's really about the struggles that some people can have with communicating, especially in the case of severe social anxiety, and it's also about friendship and family. I think the art is nice too. So those are some books I definitely resonated with. The second question is, talk about a couple of booktubers whose reading is most like your own. Well, I have found some great booktubers that I really enjoy watching, but I feel like I've still got so many more to discover. And a lot of the booktubers I watch have very different reading tastes from myself, and that's great. But as for booktubers who are similar to me, the ones that come to mind, I guess I would say Stuart Griffin and Book Chat with Pat. I say them because I think that they both have a wide variety of book tastes. They like all kinds of books. I am definitely not a channel that focuses primarily on one genre like fantasy or science fiction. If you do that, that's great. I think it's cool to have a specialty. It might help you with getting viewers too, but I make the videos I want, not whatever's going to be the most popular, and then people will still find my channel. I don't think that either of those channels are really focused on a specific genre. They just kind of seem to read whatever they want. I also say Stuart Griffin because he reads a lot of young adult as well, despite being older, and plenty of adults read young adult, but I'm just saying I can definitely relate to reading books that are kind of younger than your age range. I mean, I'm still pretty young. I'm just saying by my age, many people very well could have stopped reading young adult, which is fine. I think it depends on the person. But as for myself, I definitely read a lot of books that aren't adult books. In fact, only some of the books I read at the moment are adult. I read many books that are young adult, middle grade, or even children's books. I'll read children's picture books if I want to. I read pretty much for any age range. So it's nice to see other booktubers that do that too. Of course, if they're adults and they only read adult books, that makes perfect sense. But it can also be nice to read books for younger readers if that's just your taste. Maybe it reminds you of that time in your life, or you just like it. I mean, sometimes they're just good stories, so you don't really need to justify it. I'm just explaining my taste. And I know that Book Chat with Pat has talked about liking contemporary fiction a lot, and that's definitely my favorite genre. I know she's branched out more, but I'm sure she still loves contemporary fiction, so yeah, I can definitely relate to that with her. The third question, now we're going on to the windows part of the tag. Talk about a few books that served as window frames to you, allowing you to see the reality of others outside your experience. So as I was looking through Goodreads to see the books I've read, I realized that I have read about a lot of different experiences and situations and plan on reading a lot more. Looks like Mochi is going to be joining us. As I was saying, one of the things I've noticed is that I have read about a lot of different types of family dynamics. I mean, I've read stories where the parents are married, where they're divorced, where one or both parents are deceased. I've read about disabled parents, loving parents, abusive parents. I've read about single parents. I've read books where the main characters were adopted. I've read books where the parents were addicts. I've read books where the main characters were only children or had multiple siblings. So I think that's very important because we are only going to have experience with one or some of those types of situations. But when we read, we can learn about what it's like to be in other situations because we are going to meet people we have already who are in situations different from us, and we may not understand them and we may not know how to sympathize with them if we can't relate, but books can help us a little with that. But as for specific books, I did write some down. I have definitely read a lot of books with characters who have different identities than me when it comes to sexuality. And some of the books that come to mind, though these are certainly not all the ones I've read, one is The Simonverse by Becky Albertalli. I read those books when I was in 9th and 10th grade. Around that time, I was reading a lot of other popular young adult authors, such as John Green, who I mentioned earlier, and I was also reading Nicola Yoon and Rainbow Rowell, authors like that. Recently, I've been reading the Heartstopper series by Alice Oseman, and I've been really enjoying that. Last year, I read a young adult novel called Ziggy, Stardust, and Me by James Brandon. That was a historical fiction book that took place in, I think, 1973, and it was about a young teenage boy who was gay. Now, of course, back then, that was definitely not as accepted, and even now people still face discrimination, but certainly back then, especially when his father was not very accepting of that, that was a situation where his mother had died, so it was just his father raising him, so a very different family dynamic than I am used to. I also was not alive in that time. I didn't do a review of that book, but looking back at it, I feel that I should have, but I'm mentioning it now. I thought it was good. It was definitely something that was not my life at all, but I'm glad that I read it. Earlier this year, I read a middle grade novel in verse called Louder Than Hunger by John Shu, and that is about a boy who suffers from an eating disorder. That is something I do not have personal experience with, so that book I thought was really good, and I thought that it did a really good job at portraying what the main character was going through. I could relate to some of his feelings about anxiety, but not his main thing that he was going through, so that really helped me understand eating disorders a bit more. So I think it's really good to read a book to understand, because there are many people who do go through things like that. Also earlier this year, another middle grade in-verse novel I read was Dear Run Home by Anne Claire Lazat, and that is about a young deaf girl. So that was an interesting perspective for me to get. It went over how being deaf affected her, how her family responded to it, because her family didn't really learn sign language for her. And she also talks about how she feels about the way that people treat her. I think I particularly really enjoy reading about disability and or anything regarding mental health. I have also read books about different places, and I plan on reading a lot more. I know on my TBR there are a few books by Japanese authors, for one. I definitely enjoy learning about other countries and other cultures, and I look forward to doing more of that. Now it's time to talk about some booktubers. Question 4. Talk about a couple of booktube channels that have expanded your horizons, helped you to explore books or genres outside of your comfort zone, or challenged you in some way. One of the channels I've decided to answer this with is Reading from the Depths. I have recently started watching that channel and I'm enjoying it. The owner of that channel is a Buddhist monk, and so many of his opinions on books and just booktube and the way we talk about it are based on that belief, and so I think it's interesting to hear someone give their opinions based on a certain belief system that they have. So that's been interesting. And while he does do reviews, he's also done sort of discussion type videos where he gives his opinion on certain things, like the way certain things are on BookTube, or how we think about audiobooks and things like that. Besides him, there weren't many that really stood out to me for this question, but for the other, I decided to say Books with Sam. He's not all that different from me, and he's one of the booktubers who's more close to my age. He's only a little bit older than me, and he also has quite a wide variety of his reading tastes. But there have been some books I've added to my TBR because he's recommended them, and I haven't read them yet, but they are books that I feel I probably wouldn't read otherwise. Like if I heard about them on their own, I probably wouldn't have added them to my TBR. But he talks about them and really highly recommends them, so I'm like, okay, I'll go ahead and read those. So eventually I should be talking about those books on my channel whenever I get to them. But basically, I think with any book, I'm opening myself to a new perspective, so I think I get recommendations from a lot of channels, but he was one of them who came to mind because he's a channel I watch very often, so I may not read every single book that he highly recommends, but there have been some where I'm like, okay, I'll read it. And then the fifth prompt is just to tag others. So like I usually say, whoever sees this and wants to do it can do it. I think this is a really good tag. I really like what it's about. I like that it really is about books and talks about them in a sort of, I don't know if metaphorical is the right word, but using windows and mirrors as an example to talk about how books can help us see ourselves, but also help us see other people. And I think books are probably the best way that we can really see how someone else is feeling. I think listening to music can be a good way for that too, but music is often more poetic and metaphorical, and it can be exaggerated. I think books are a bit more straightforward and clear. Of course, I love music as well, but I definitely think that books are a great form of art for helping us understand other people better, and I think that reading so much is probably one of the reasons why I'm very understanding and empathetic. So thank you to books. Thank you for watching this video. Like I said, if you want to do this tag, you can. Like whenever I do a tag, I have the questions in the description, so you can easily just look at the description and get the questions from there. Thank you for watching.